The howling wind carried Wilhelmina Gardner's desperate sobs across the dusty main street of Reno, Nevada, as her father's firm grip on her wrist pulled her unwillingly toward the general store, ignoring the fact that at 22 years old, she was far too grown for such treatment. It was 1875, and despite the progressive spirit sweeping through parts of the West, Wilhelmina's life remained locked in a prison of her father's making, a cage built of overprotection, dismissal, and the stubborn refusal to see her as the capable woman she had become. "Father, please," Wilhelmina pleaded, attempting to wrench her arm free as several townsfolk stopped to stare. Her cheeks burned with humiliation. "I simply asked to visit Mrs. Hammond's boarding house alone. I don't need an escort for everything." Harold Gardner, a respected banker whose influence in Reno had grown alongside the town itself, merely tightened his grip. "Nonsense, Willa. You know perfectly well that young ladies don't wander about unaccompanied. What would your poor mother think if she could see you now? God rest her soul." The mention of her mother, 6 years deceased, was Harold's favorite weapon. Wilhelmina fell silent, the familiar weight of guilt settling on her shoulders like a heavy cloak. Her father had never recovered from losing his wife to influenza, and in his grief had transferred all his protective instincts to his only daughter, smothering her in the process. "Mr. Gardner." The deep voice cut through the tension like a knife. Both Wilhelmina and her father turned to see Xavier Quinn dismounting from his stallion. The tall cowboy removed his hat, revealing sun-streaked brown hair as he approached them. At 30 years old, Xavier had earned respect throughout the territory as a skilled rancher and fair businessman. "Afternoon, Quinn," Harold acknowledged stiffly. He had never much cared for the independent rancher whose 1,500 acres bordered the eastern edge of town. Quinn represented everything Harold distrusted: the untamed spirit of the frontier that had lured so many to their doom. "Miss Gardner." Xavier nodded respectfully in Wilhelmina's direction, his hazel eyes meeting hers directly, not looking past her to her father, as most men did. "I believe you dropped this back at the post office." He extended his hand, revealing a small journal bound in worn leather. Wilhelmina's eyes widened. The diary contained her private thoughts, poetry, and dreams of independence, things her father would never allow her to express aloud. "Thank you, Mr. Quinn." She reached for it quickly, her fingers brushing against his calloused palm. "You've been to the post office today." Harold frowned at his daughter. "I thought you were helping Mrs. Billings organize the church social all morning." Wilhelmina's throat tightened. "I finished early, Father. I had a letter to mail to Cousin Elizabeth, without informing me." Harold's voice took on the patronizing tone that made Wilhelmina feel no older than 12. "Willa, how many times must we discuss this?" "A young lady must always, Mr. Gardner," Xavier interrupted smoothly. "I was hoping to speak with you about the bank's financing terms for expanding my cattle operation. Perhaps we could discuss it over coffee at the hotel restaurant. I hear they've hired a new cook from San Francisco." Harold hesitated, torn between his desire to lecture his daughter and the prospect of a profitable business discussion. Finally, he nodded. "Very well, Quinn. Willa, go directly to Mrs. Hammond's and wait for me there. I'll collect you within the hour." "Yes, Father," Wilhelmina murmured, clutching her journal to her chest. As Harold strode toward the hotel, Xavier lingered a moment longer. "Miss Gardner," he said quietly, "I didn't actually see you at the post office today." She looked up, confused. "Then how did you?" "I found that journal by the creek last week. Your name is inside the cover." His eyes held no judgment, only a spark of understanding. "Seemed like you might need rescuing from that conversation." Wilhelmina's breath caught. Not only had he returned her most private thoughts without prying, but he had also intuited her distress and intervened. "Thank you, Mr. Quinn. My father means well, but he treats you like you're still in pinafores." Xavier smiled slightly. "Forgive my boldness, Miss Gardner, but I've observed that you possess far more sense than half the grown men in this town. Your father might benefit from recognizing that fact." Before she could respond, he replaced his hat and walked toward the hotel, leaving Wilhelmina staring after him with a strange, fluttering sensation in her chest. For the first time in years, someone had truly seen her as the woman she was, not the child her father insisted on preserving. She opened her journal, finding a pressed wildflower marking her last entry. She hadn't left it there. On the adjacent blank page was a short note in unfamiliar handwriting. "Words have power. Yours deserve to be heard. XQ." Wilhelmina closed the journal, her heart pounding. In that moment, something awakened within her, a determination that had long been dormant. Xavier Quinn had given her more than just her journal back. He had returned a piece of herself she had nearly forgotten existed. With newfound resolve, Wilhelmina turned not toward Mrs. Hammond's boarding house, but toward the town's small newspaper office. Perhaps it was time her words found their way beyond the pages of her private journal. And perhaps, just perhaps, Xavier Quinn might be the ally she needed to finally step out of her father's shadow. The Nevada Sentinel occupied a modest building at the edge of Reno's commercial district. Wilhelmina had walked past it hundreds of times but had never dared enter. Today was different. Today, Xavier Quinn had reminded her that she was a grown woman capable of making her own decisions. The bell above the door jingled as she stepped inside. The office smelled of ink and paper, a scent Wilhelmina found instantly comforting. A bespectacled man with ink-stained fingers looked up from a printing press. "Miss Gardner." Edward Thatcher, the newspaper's owner and editor, seemed surprised to see her. "What brings Harold Gardner's daughter to my humble establishment?" Wilhelmina straightened her shoulders. "Mr. Thatcher, I'd like to inquire about submitting an article for publication." Thatcher's eyebrows rose. "An article? About the church social, perhaps?" "No." Wilhelmina's fingers tightened around her journal. "About the need for a proper lending library in Reno. I've researched how other frontier towns have established them, and I believe it would greatly benefit our community." Thatcher studied her for a long moment. "Does your father know you're here, Miss Gardner?" The familiar question stung, but Wilhelmina refused to be deterred. "Mr. Thatcher, I am 22 years old. While I respect my father greatly, I am capable of forming my own opinions and taking my own actions." A smile slowly spread across the editor's face. "Well said, Miss Gardner. Let me see what you've written and we'll discuss it." For the next hour, Wilhelmina forgot about her promise to wait at Mrs. Hammond's. She became absorbed in discussing her ideas with Thatcher, who seemed genuinely impressed by her knowledge and passion. When they finally reached an agreement, she would write a series of articles advocating for the library. Wilhelmina felt lightheaded with excitement. Her elation was short-lived. As she exited the newspaper office, she spotted her father storming down the street toward her, Xavier Quinn following close behind. Wilhelmina Elizabeth Gardner. Her father rarely used her full name. "What is the meaning of this? I specifically instructed you to go to Mrs. Hammond's." Xavier's eyes met hers over her father's shoulder, concern evident in his gaze. "Father, Mr. Gardner." Thatcher had followed her outside. "Your daughter has just agreed to write a series of articles for the Sentinel. You should be proud. She's quite articulate and has excellent ideas for community improvement." Harold's face reddened. "Articles? Willa has no business writing for newspapers. She's barely more than a child. The words stung like a physical blow. Wilhelmina felt something inside her break and then reform, stronger and more resolute. "Father, I am not a child." Her voice was quiet but firm. "I am a grown woman, and it's time you recognized that fact." Harold seemed taken aback by her defiance. "This is inappropriate, Willa. We'll discuss this at home. Come along now." "No." The single word hung in the air between them. "I beg your pardon." Harold's voice was dangerously low. "I said no, Father. I've agreed to write these articles, and I intend to honor that commitment." Wilhelmina's heart pounded so hard she feared it might burst from her chest, but she stood her ground. Xavier stepped forward. "Mr. Gardner, if I might interject, you've done quite enough, Quinn," Harold snapped. "First you distract me with talk of financing, then you rush back here to tell me my daughter is missing. I should have known you were involved in this somehow." "Mr. Quinn did nothing but show concern for my welfare," Wilhelmina protested. "As for the articles, that was entirely my decision." Harold's jaw tightened. "We're going home. Now." He reached for Wilhelmina's arm. Xavier moved between them. "Mr. Gardner, I understand your concern, but manhandling your adult daughter in the middle of town isn't going to resolve anything. How dare you tell me how to treat my own child?" Harold fumed. "She's not a child," Xavier said quietly, "and treating her as one does a disservice to the intelligent, capable woman standing before you." A small crowd had begun to gather, drawn by the raised voices. Wilhelmina felt the weight of their stares, but for once she didn't shrink from the attention. "Father," she said, softening her tone, "please, let's not do this here. I'll come home and we can discuss this privately." Harold glanced around, suddenly aware of the spectacle they were creating. His reputation in Reno meant everything to him. "Very well," he conceded stiffly, "but this matter is far from settled." As they turned to leave, Xavier spoke again. "Miss Gardner." He waited until she faced him. "The Cattlemen's Association is hosting a meeting tomorrow to discuss water rights. As someone concerned with community development, perhaps you'd find it educational. 3 o'clock at the town hall." Wilhelmina nodded, understanding the invitation for what it was, a chance to step further into the adult world her father had kept from her. "Thank you, Mr. Quinn. I'll consider it." The walk home passed in tense silence. Wilhelmina could feel her father's anger radiating from him in waves, but something had changed. For the first time, she wasn't afraid of his disapproval. Xavier's words had validated what she'd always known, but had begun to doubt that she was a woman deserving of respect, not a child requiring constant supervision. When they reached their handsome 2-story home on the edge of town, Harold finally spoke. "Your behavior today was unacceptable, Willa. What would people think, seeing you argue with your father in public?" "Perhaps they would think I'm finally growing up," Wilhelmina replied, removing her bonnet as they entered the front parlor. "Father, I cannot continue living this way. Mother has been gone for 6 years. I'm not a little girl anymore." Harold sank into his favorite armchair, suddenly looking older than his 50 years. "You're all I have left, Willa, after your mother died." "I know you're trying to protect me," she said gently, kneeling beside his chair. "But keeping me locked away from the world isn't protection, it's imprisonment. I need to make my own choices, even my own mistakes. Like getting involved with men like Quinn." Harold's voice hardened. "I've heard stories about him. He lived with the Paiutes for a time, you know. Hardly respectable company for a banker's daughter." "Mr. Quinn was simply being kind today," Wilhelmina protested, though the mention of Xavier's past intrigued her. "And he was right. You cannot continue treating me like a child." Harold studied her face. "You've changed, Willa. Something's different today." "Nothing's changed, Father. I'm the same person I've always been. You're just seeing me clearly for the first time in years." She reached for his hand. "I love you, that will never change, but I need to live my own life." For a long moment, Harold said nothing. Then he sighed heavily. "Your mother would know what to do, she always did." "Mother would tell you to let me spread my wings," Wilhelmina said softly. "She always encouraged my independence, remember?" A ghost of a smile touched Harold's lips. "She did it that, said you had her spirit. Then honor her memory by trusting that spirit." Wilhelmina squeezed his hand. "Beginning with allowing me to write those articles for the Sentinel." Harold frowned. "Newspaper writing is hardly a suitable occupation for a young lady." "I'm not seeking occupation, Father. I'm seeking to make a positive contribution to Reno. A library would benefit everyone, including the children at the school where I volunteer." The mention of her volunteer work, the one independent activity her father had grudgingly permitted, seemed to soften Harold's resistance. "One article," he conceded. "We'll see how it's received before discussing any series." It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Wilhelmina kissed her father's cheek. "Thank you. And about the Cattlemen's Association meeting tomorrow?" Harold's eyes narrowed. "So that's what Quinn was really after." "The meeting is public, Father. I merely wish to observe and learn about local governance." Wilhelmina kept her tone reasonable. "You always say knowledge is valuable." "I'll accompany you," Harold declared. Wilhelmina bit back her frustration. "Very well. We'll attend together." It was a small victory, but as she climbed the stairs to her bedroom that evening, Wilhelmina felt a new sense of purpose. She opened her journal, reread Xavier's note, and began to write. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities, and for the first time in years, she felt ready to seize them. The Cattlemen's Association meeting was already underway when Wilhelmina and her father arrived at the town hall the following afternoon. The room was filled predominantly with men ranchers, merchants, and landowners, with only a few wives present, sitting quietly at the margins. Wilhelmina felt conspicuous as heads turned to observe their entrance. Xavier stood at the front of the room, addressing the assembly about water access rights during the upcoming dry season. He paused mid-sentence when he spotted Wilhelmina, a brief smile crossing his features before he continued his presentation. "As you can see from the proposed schedule," Xavier indicated a large map of the region, "equitable water access is possible if we coordinate our usage. The smaller ranches to the north cannot sustain their herds if the larger operations downstream divert too much water too early in the season." "That's easy for you to say, Quinn," called out Bartholomew Stryker, owner of the largest cattle operation in the territory. "Your land has natural springs. The rest of us aren't so fortunate." "Those springs serve the Paiute Reservation as well as my ranch," Xavier replied evenly. "Which is why I've included them in these discussions, despite objections from some quarters." Wilhelmina noticed for the first time a Native American man sitting quietly at the side of the room. Unlike the other attendees, no one had taken a seat near him despite the crowded conditions. "My point," Xavier continued, "is that cooperation benefits everyone. Drought affects us all, regardless of the size of our holdings or the color of our skin." Wilhelmina was impressed by Xavier's diplomacy and obvious command of the facts. As the discussion continued, she found herself drawn to his logical approach and fair-mindedness, qualities she had always valued but rarely witnessed in public discourse. When the meeting adjourned for refreshments, Harold was immediately engaged in conversation by several business associates. Seeing her opportunity, Wilhelmina made her way toward Xavier, who was speaking with the Native American man she had noticed earlier. "Miss Gardner," Xavier greeted her with a respectful nod. "I'm pleased you could attend. Allow me to introduce Joseph Winnemucca, representative of the Paiute tribe and a personal friend." "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Winnemucca." Wilhelmina extended her hand without hesitation, ignoring the disapproving glances from nearby townspeople. Joseph seemed surprised by the gesture but shook her hand firmly. "The pleasure is mine, Miss Gardner. Xavier speaks highly of you." "Does he?" Wilhelmina glanced at Xavier, who suddenly seemed very interested in adjusting his hat. "I mentioned your interest in establishing a library," Xavier explained. "Joseph's sister, Sarah, is one of the few Paiute who received formal education. She values literacy greatly." "A library would benefit all communities," Joseph added. "Knowledge is the one resource that grows when shared." "That's precisely what I argued in my article," Wilhelmina said eagerly. "Books provide windows to worlds beyond our own experiences." "Your father permitted the article then?" Xavier asked. "One article as a trial." Wilhelmina smiled. "It's progress." Joseph excused himself to speak with another Paiute man who had entered, leaving Wilhelmina alone with Xavier. "Your presentation was very informative, Mr. Quinn," she said. "I hadn't realized water rights were so complex." "Most things worth understanding usually are," Xavier replied. "Much like people." His gaze was direct, searching. "How did things resolve with your father yesterday?" Wilhelmina sighed. "We reached a compromise, though he still insists on chaperoning me everywhere." She glanced across the room where Harold was watching them while pretending not to. "As you can see, progress comes in small steps," Xavier observed. "Your father loves you deeply. That much is evident." "Love shouldn't feel like a cage," Wilhelmina said softly. "No, it shouldn't." Xavier's voice held understanding that made her wonder about his own past. "Miss Gardner, Willa, it's time we were leaving." Harold appeared at her elbow. "Good day, Quinn." Xavier tipped his hat. "Mr. Gardner, Miss Gardner, thank you for your interest in our proceedings. Perhaps you'd consider documenting them for your newspaper articles. An objective observer might bring fresh perspective." "An excellent suggestion," Wilhelmina replied quickly. "Thank you, Mr. Quinn." As her father escorted her from the town hall, Wilhelmina glanced back to find Xavier still watching her, a thoughtful expression on his face. Something stirred within her, a longing for the freedom and respect he seemed to offer so effortlessly. "I don't like the way Quinn looks at you," Harold muttered as they walked home. "And how is that, father?" Wilhelmina asked. Harold frowned. "Like you're his equal." Wilhelmina smiled to herself. "Perhaps because that's exactly what I am." Over the following weeks, Wilhelmina's first article about the library appeared in the Nevada Sentinel to considerable acclaim. Many townsfolk, particularly the schoolteacher and the minister's wife, expressed support for the idea. Emboldened by this success, Harold reluctantly agreed to let her continue the series. With each article, Wilhelmina found her confidence growing. She began attending more town meetings, still accompanied by her father, but increasingly voicing her own opinions during discussions. She also formed a ladies' literary committee to begin collecting book donations and planning fundraising events for the proposed library. Though her father maintained his protective stance, small changes became apparent. He no longer held her arm in public as if she might wander off like a toddler. He began introducing her to business associates without immediately speaking over her. And most significantly, he started listening when she spoke at dinner about her ideas and observations. Xavier Quinn remained a constant presence in Wilhelmina's expanding world. They encountered each other regularly at town functions, exchanging views on everything from cattle breeding to Shakespeare. Their conversations were always proper and often within earshot of others, but Wilhelmina found herself looking forward to them with increasing anticipation. One warm afternoon in late May, Wilhelmina was leaving the post office when she spotted Xavier tying his horse outside the general store. "Mr. Quinn," she called, crossing the street to meet him. Xavier turned, his face brightening. "Miss Gardner, I just finished reading your latest article on the educational benefits of libraries. Very persuasive." "Thank you." Wilhelmina felt that now familiar flutter in her chest. "The response has been encouraging. Mr. Thatcher says he's received 15 letters supporting the initiative." "I'm not surprised. You write with conviction." Xavier hesitated, then asked, "Is your father at the bank today?" "Yes, until 5 o'clock. Why do you ask?" Xavier glanced around the relatively quiet street. "I was wondering if you might be interested in seeing something. It wouldn't take long, and we'd remain within town limits." Wilhelmina knew she should decline. Unaccompanied outings with a bachelor were precisely the sort of thing her father would forbid. Yet the prospect of a small adventure and more time with Xavier was too tempting to resist. "What did you want to show me?" Xavier smiled. "It's better as a surprise. Do you trust me, Miss Gardner?" The question seemed to carry weight beyond this moment. Wilhelmina considered her answer carefully. "Yes, Mr. Quinn, I believe I do." "Then follow me." He offered his arm, which she took after only a moment's hesitation. They walked toward the eastern edge of town, past the last row of buildings, to a small rise overlooking Reno. There, partially hidden by cottonwood trees, stood an abandoned one-room cabin. "What is this place?" Wilhelmina asked as Xavier led her toward it. It was the original schoolhouse, built when Reno was just a settlement supporting the mining operations. Xavier pushed open the weathered door. Most people have forgotten it exists. Inside, dust motes danced in the sunlight streaming through the windows. The room was empty save for a few broken desks, and to Wilhelmina's astonishment, 3 bookshelves filled with volumes of various sizes and conditions. "Mr. Quinn," she exclaimed, moving quickly to examine the collection. "Where did these come from?" Xavier leaned against the doorframe, watching her with evident pleasure. "I've been collecting them for years, some from mail-order catalogs, others from travelers passing through. A few were gifts from Joseph's sister, who shares your passion for literature." Wilhelmina ran her fingers reverently over the spines Shakespeare's collected works, scientific treatises, history books and novels by Dickens and Austen. "Why keep them here? Why not in your home? My ranch house has limited space, and books need to be shared." Xavier stepped into the room, closing the distance between them. "I thought these might serve as the beginning of your library collection. There are nearly 200 volumes here." Overwhelmed by his generosity, Wilhelmina turned to face him. "You've been planning this, even before my articles." Xavier's expression softened. "Let's just say I recognized a kindred spirit the first time I read the poetry in your journal." Wilhelmina's cheeks warmed. "You read my journal." "Only the page that fell loose when I found it," Xavier admitted. "A poem about a woman watching eagles soar while she remained earthbound." It was moving. The thought that he had connected with her most private thoughts should have been mortifying. Instead, Wilhelmina felt understood in a way she never had before. "No one has ever taken my writing seriously." "Not until you." "I take you seriously, Wilhelmina," Xavier said quietly. "Everything about you." The air between them seemed to thicken. Wilhelmina was acutely aware of his proximity, of the afternoon sunlight highlighting the golden flecks in his hazel eyes, of her own rapidly beating heart. "Mr. Quinn," she began, uncertain what she even wanted to say. "Xavier," he corrected gently. "When we're alone, at least I'd like to hear my name from your lips." "Xavier," she whispered, testing the intimacy of it. "Thank you for the books, for everything." He reached out slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she wished, and tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. "Wilhelmina." The sound of approaching horses shattered the moment. They stepped apart quickly as voices became audible outside. "The old schoolhouse is just up here," a man was saying. "Abandoned for years, but solid construction. Could make a good storage building for the town." Wilhelmina recognized Mayor Whitley's voice, accompanied by what sounded like several councilmen. Xavier moved swiftly to the rear window. "There's a path through the trees," he said urgently. "If we leave now, they won't see us." The impropriety of their situation suddenly struck Wilhelmina with full force. Being discovered alone with Xavier in an abandoned building would create a scandal that would devastate her father and potentially ruin her reputation. They slipped out the back, just as the mayor's party reached the front door. Moving quietly through the trees, they circled around to approach town from a different direction. "I apologize for putting you in that position," Xavier said once they were safely away. "It was thoughtless of me." "No," Wilhelmina shook her head. "I'm grateful you showed me the books. And—" She hesitated, gathering her courage. "I'm not sorry for the time we spent there." Xavier studied her face. "Wilhelmina, I need to be honest with you. My interest in you extends beyond friendship. I've tried to maintain proper distance out of respect for your father, but my feelings continue to grow stronger." The directness of his declaration took her breath away. "Xavier, you don't need to respond," he interrupted gently. "I only wanted you to know that when I defend your right to be treated as an adult, it's not merely principle. It's because I see you truly see you and admire the woman you are." They had reached the edge of town. Soon they would need to resume their public personas, the respectable banker's daughter and the solitary rancher. The thought filled Wilhelmina with sadness. "My father is hosting a dinner party next Saturday," she said impulsively. "The bank's investors and their families. Would you consider attending? As my guest?" Xavier's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Would your father welcome my presence?" "He might not," Wilhelmina admitted, "but it's time he understood that I make my own choices about the company I keep." A slow smile spread across Xavier's face. "In that case, Miss Gardner, I would be honored to accept your invitation." As they parted ways at the corner near the bank, Wilhelmina felt a curious mixture of apprehension and exhilaration. For the first time in her life, she was charting her own course, and it was leading her directly toward Xavier Quinn. The week leading up to the dinner party passed in a flurry of preparations. Wilhelmina found herself both dreading and anticipating Saturday evening with equal measure. When she finally revealed to her father that she had invited Xavier Quinn to the dinner, Harold's reaction was predictably negative. "Absolutely not," he declared, slamming his ledger book closed. "Quinn is not welcome in this house." "Father, he is a respected rancher and businessman," Wilhelmina argued. "Several of your investors have dealings with him. Business dealings are one thing, social engagements are quite another." Harold paced the study irritably. "The man is an outsider, Willa. He spent years living among Indians, for heaven's sake." "The Paiute," Wilhelmina corrected. "And his friendship with them has helped prevent conflicts that other settlements have suffered. Many consider it an asset to the community." Harold stopped pacing to stare at his daughter. "Since when do you concern yourself with such matters? This isn't like you, Willa." "Perhaps you don't know me as well as you think," she replied quietly. "I've invited Mr. Quinn, and I expect you to treat him with the same courtesy you extend to all our guests." Father and daughter locked eyes in a silent battle of wills. Finally, Harold sighed heavily. "Very well, but don't expect me to like it." "I don't," Wilhelmina said, softening her tone. "I only ask that you give him a fair chance, for my sake." Saturday evening arrived with clear skies and a gentle breeze. Wilhelmina had spent extra care on her appearance. selecting a cornflower blue dress that complemented her eyes and arranging her chestnut hair in a more sophisticated style than her usual simple bun. When she descended the staircase to the parlor where guests were gathering, she noted with satisfaction several appreciative glances and her father's frown of surprise at her mature presentation. Xavier arrived precisely on time, dressed in a well-tailored suit that transformed his usual rugged appearance. He had trimmed his hair and beard, though his tanned skin and confident bearing still marked him as a man more at home on the range than in a parlor. "Miss Gardner," he greeted Wilhelmina formally, presenting her with a small bouquet of desert wildflowers. "Thank you for your invitation." "Mr. Quinn," she replied, accepting the flowers with a smile. "I'm delighted you could attend." Harold approached, his banker's smile firmly in place despite the coldness in his eyes. "Quinn, I understand we have you to thank for this unexpected addition to our gathering." Xavier met the older man's gaze steadily. "Mr. Gardner, your daughter was kind enough to include me." "You have a lovely home." "Yes, well," Harold gestured vaguely. "Willa's mother had excellent taste. If you'll excuse me, I must greet the Hendersons." As her father moved away, Wilhelmina sighed. "I apologize for my father's behavior." "No apology necessary," Xavier assured her. "I didn't expect an immediate welcome." The evening progressed with the stilted formality typical of such gatherings. Dinner was served in the formal dining room, with Wilhelmina seated between elderly Mrs. Patterson and young Mr. Henderson, while Xavier was relegated to the far end of the table between the mayor's spinster sister and a hard-of-hearing cattle buyer from Sacramento. Throughout the meal, Wilhelmina caught Xavier's eye occasionally across the table. Each time, he offered a small smile that somehow made the tedious dinner conversation more bearable. She noted how effortlessly he engaged with his dinner companions, drawing out the usually taciturn Miss Whitley and patiently repeating his responses for the benefit of Mr. Chambers's failing hearing. After dinner, the men retired to Harold's study for brandy and cigars, while the women gathered in the parlor for coffee. Wilhelmina found herself seated beside Mrs. Henderson, who leaned in conspiratorially. "That Mr. Quinn seems quite taken with you," the older woman observed. "He could hardly keep his eyes off you during dinner." Wilhelmina felt her cheeks warm. "Mr. Quinn and I share an interest in community development. He's been supportive of the library initiative." Mrs. Henderson patted her hand knowingly. "Of course, dear. Community development." Her tone made it clear she believed nothing of the sort. "Well, he's certainly handsome, if a bit unconventional. They say he can track like an Indian and speak their language too." "The Paiute have been his neighbors for years," Wilhelmina replied, keeping her voice even. "It seems sensible to learn to communicate with them." "Perhaps," Mrs. Henderson conceded dubiously. "Your father doesn't appear to approve, though." "My father is protective," Wilhelmina said diplomatically, "but I'm old enough to form my own opinions about people." "Indeed you are, Mrs. Henderson agreed with unexpected sincerity. 22, aren't you? I was already married with a child on the way at your age. It's high time your father let you spread your wings a bit." The conversation shifted to other topics, but Mrs. Henderson's words lingered in Wilhelmina's mind. She was far from the only young woman her age still living under her father's roof, but most enjoyed considerably more freedom than Harold permitted. Some even had husbands and children of their own, a future Wilhelmina had begun to think would never be hers as long as her father maintained his stranglehold on her independence. When the men rejoined the ladies an hour later, Wilhelmina immediately sensed tension. Xavier's usually relaxed posture was rigid, and her father's face bore the tight expression that indicated barely controlled anger. Whatever had transpired in the study, it hadn't been pleasant. As guests began to depart, Xavier approached Wilhelmina. "I should be going as well. Thank you for including me this evening." "Must you leave so soon?" Wilhelmina asked, reluctant to end their time together. Xavier glanced toward Harold, who was watching them with undisguised disapproval. "I think it's best. Your father and I had a frank discussion that I suspect has exhausted his tolerance for my presence." "What did he say to you?" Wilhelmina demanded, indignation rising. "Nothing I hadn't anticipated," Xavier assured her. "Don't worry about it." But she did worry, especially when her father's mood remained dark after the last guest had departed. Harold poured himself another brandy and stared broodingly into the fireplace. "What did you say to Mr. Quinn?" Wilhelmina asked directly. Harold's gaze snapped to her face. "I merely made it clear that his attentions toward you are unwelcome. The man has no business pursuing a young lady so far above his station." "Above his station?" Wilhelmina echoed incredulously. "Xavier Quinn owns one of the largest cattle operations in the territory. He's educated, respected. He's a drifter who struck lucky with land speculation," Harold interrupted harshly. "A man who chooses to consort with savages rather than his own kind. He's not suitable company for my daughter." Wilhelmina's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "His consorting, as you put it, helped prevent bloodshed when tensions rose with the Paiute 2 years ago. Many consider him a hero for that." "Many are fools." Harold drained his glass. "I forbid you from seeing him again, Willa, and that's final." The directive, so familiar from her childhood, struck Wilhelmina differently now. Instead of the guilt and acquiescence it would once have produced, she felt only a cold resolve. "I am not a child to be forbidden, father," she said quietly. "I respect your opinion, but in this matter I will make my own judgment." Harold stared at his daughter as if seeing a stranger. "What has gotten into you lately? Ever since Quinn returned that journal of yours, you've been different, defiant, headstrong." "I've always been those things," Wilhelmina replied. "I simply stopped hiding them to please you." She moved toward the staircase. "Good night, father." As she climbed the stairs, Wilhelmina heard the sound of glass shattering her father's brandy snifter thrown into the fireplace in frustration. The noise saddened but didn't deter her. Something fundamental had changed between them, and there would be no returning to the docile daughter she had once been. In her bedroom, Wilhelmina crossed to the window that overlooked the street. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamonds across the Nevada sky. Somewhere beyond the edge of town, Xavier Quinn was riding home, perhaps thinking of her as she was thinking of him. For the first time, Wilhelmina allowed herself to fully acknowledge the feelings that had been growing since their first meaningful interaction. It wasn't just that Xavier treated her as an equal, though that remained powerfully appealing. It was the man himself, his integrity, his quiet strength, his willingness to forge his own path regardless of others' expectations. Wilhelmina Gardner was falling in love with Xavier Quinn, and judging by the way he looked at her, the feeling might well be mutual. The realization both thrilled and terrified her. Any relationship between them would mean defying her father, possibly even breaking with him entirely. Was she prepared for such a step? As she readied herself for bed, Wilhelmina made no firm decisions. But for the first time in her life, she allowed herself to imagine a future shaped by her own choices rather than her father's demands. It was a heady, frightening vision, and one she found herself increasingly unwilling to relinquish. 2 days after the dinner party, Wilhelmina received a note delivered by a Paiute boy who appeared at the back door of the Gardner home. The carefully folded paper contained just a few lines in Xavier's now familiar handwriting. "The old schoolhouse, Tomorrow at 2 p.m. The mayor's committee will be there to evaluate it for town use. I've suggested it might make an excellent library. Your presence would be valuable if you can manage it. XQ. Wilhelmina read the note 3 times, her mind racing. The meeting represented both opportunity and challenge. As the leading advocate for the library project, her input would indeed be valuable. But attending would mean directly defying her father's prohibition against seeing Xavier again. After careful consideration, Wilhelmina decided on a compromise. She would attend the meeting, but not alone. Mrs. Billings, the minister's wife and a vocal supporter of the library initiative, would make an excellent companion, one respectable enough that even Harold could hardly object. The following afternoon, Wilhelmina and Mrs. Billings made their way to the old schoolhouse. They found Mayor Whitley, 3 council members, Xavier, and to Wilhelmina's surprise, Joseph Winnemucca already gathered inside. The men had been examining the structure's soundness and discussing necessary repairs. Miss Gardner, Mayor Whitley greeted her with evident pleasure. And Mrs. Billings? Excellent. Quinn here has been singing the praises of this building as a potential library. Said we should consult the lady spearheading the initiative before making any decisions. It's a wonderful suggestion, Wilhelmina replied, casting a grateful glance toward Xavier. The location is accessible yet quiet, perfect for reading and study. For the next hour, the group discussed the practicalities of converting the schoolhouse into a library. Wilhelmina outlined her vision for the space, including separate areas for children's books, reference materials, and a reading room. Mrs. Billings enthusiastically supported each suggestion, adding practical insights about furnishings and operation hours. Throughout the discussion, Wilhelmina was aware of Xavier's quiet presence. He spoke only when directly addressed, yet his support was evident in the way he deferred to her expertise and reinforced her points when the council members seemed skeptical. It was a subtle but powerful form of respect that contrasted sharply with her father's dismissive attitude. As the meeting concluded, Mayor Whitley shook Wilhelmina's hand with new deference. "You've clearly given this considerable thought, Miss Gardner. The council will vote next week, but I believe you've convinced us. This old schoolhouse may have found a new purpose." "The building is suitable," Joseph Winnemucca added, speaking for the first time. "Sturdy walls, good light. The Paiute children could use it too." Wilhelmina's response was immediate and sincere. "Of course, a library serves everyone who wishes to learn." Joseph nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. "My people will help with repairs. We have skilled workers." This offer seemed to surprise several council members, but Xavier smoothly guided the conversation toward practical matters of scheduling and materials, diffusing potential objections before they could be voiced. Wilhelmina marveled at his diplomatic skill, recognizing that he was building bridges between communities that rarely cooperated. As the group dispersed, Mrs. Billings engaged the mayor in conversation about fundraising, allowing Wilhelmina a moment alone with Xavier near the bookshelves. "Thank you," she said quietly. "This is perfect for the library." Xavier smiled. "I thought you'd approve. The books I've collected can remain here, your first acquisitions." "Our first acquisitions," Wilhelmina corrected. "This is becoming a true community effort thanks largely to you. I merely provided the location. You're the one who inspired people to support the idea." Xavier's gaze was warm with admiration. "Your father would be proud if he could see you today." Wilhelmina's expression clouded. "I doubt that. He specifically forbade me from seeing you again after the dinner party." Xavier's jaw tightened. "I suspected as much. He made his feelings quite clear during our private conversation in his study." "What exactly did he say to you?" Wilhelmina pressed. You never told me. Xavier hesitated, then sighed. He suggested that my interest in you was motivated by your family's social position and wealth. He implied that a man with my unconventional background would find such connections useful. Wilhelmina gasped. That's outrageous and insulting to us both. He's trying to protect you, Xavier said, more generously than Wilhelmina felt her father deserved. In his way. By treating me like a prized possession rather than a grown woman. She shook her head in frustration. I've had enough of his protection. Xavier placed a gentle hand on her arm. Don't be too harsh with him. Fathers and daughters, it's complicated, especially when there's no mother to balance things. The tenderness in his voice made Wilhelmina curious. You sound as if you speak from experience. A shadow crossed Xavier's face. My own father was similarly protective of my sister. After our mother died, he barely let Elizabeth out of his sight. It nearly suffocated her. What happened? Wilhelmina asked. She ran away at 17. Xavier's expression grew distant. Married a man our father despised, partly, I think, because father had forbidden the match. It ended badly, very badly. The pain in his voice was unmistakable. Wilhelmina placed her hand over his. I'm sorry. Xavier seemed to shake himself from the memory. The point is, I understand both sides of this situation. Your father fears losing you, but keeping you caged will only make that outcome more certain. Willa, dear, Mrs. Billings called from the doorway, we should be getting back. I promised Reverend Billings I wouldn't be gone more than 2 hours. Wilhelmina reluctantly withdrew her hand from Xavier's. Coming, Mrs. Billings. To Xavier, she added softly, this isn't over. We'll find a way. As they walked back toward town, Mrs. Billings chatted happily about the library plans, seemingly oblivious to Wilhelmina's preoccupation. It wasn't until they were nearly at the minister's house that the older woman said casually, Mr. Quinn seems quite taken with you, my dear. Wilhelmina almost stumbled in surprise. We share common interests, that's all. Mrs. Billings smiled knowingly. Of course. And the way he looks at you when you're speaking as if every word were precious, that's merely scholarly appreciation, I suppose. Heat crept up Wilhelmina's neck. Mrs. Billings, oh, don't be embarrassed, child. The minister's wife patted her arm. He's a fine man. Unusual, certainly, but with a good heart. Anyone can see that. My father can't, Wilhelmina admitted. He's forbidden me from seeing Mr. Quinn. Mrs. Billings clucked her tongue disapprovingly. Harold needs to recognize you're a woman grown, not his little girl anymore. Perhaps Reverend Billings should have a word with him. Thank you, but I think that would only make matters worse. Wilhelmina sighed. Father is stubborn. As are you, my dear, Mrs. Billings observed with a smile. Apple doesn't fall far, does it? Well, you know where to find me if you need a sympathetic ear or a respectable chaperone for future library meetings. The older woman's unexpected support lifted Wilhelmina's spirits. As they parted ways, she felt less alone in her struggle for independence and the right to choose her own path and perhaps her own partner. The following day brought an unexpected complication. Harold announced at breakfast that they would be hosting a special guest for dinner that evening, James Blackburn, the son of Harold's banking associate from Sacramento. James is considering investing in Nevada ventures, Harold explained, buttering his toast with exaggerated care. I've spoken highly of Reno's potential. He's particularly interested in meeting you, Willa. Wilhelmina recognized the matchmaking attempt immediately. Is he? How flattering, though I'm not sure what insight I could offer about banking investments. James is interested in more than just banking, Harold replied, not meeting her eyes. He's 28, from an excellent family, and looking to settle down before expanding his father's business eastward. I see. Wilhelmina set down her teacup with deliberate precision. "And you thought I might make a suitable bride for this expansion plan?" Harold's expression hardened. "I thought you might appreciate meeting an educated gentleman with proper prospects and connections, unlike certain ranchers who shall remain nameless." "Father, James will arrive at 6, Harold interrupted, rising from the table. "Wear your green dress. It brings out your eyes." Wilhelmina sat motionless as her father left for the bank, torn between outrage at his transparent manipulation and a deep weariness with their ongoing conflict. She had no interest in meeting James Blackburn or any other suitor of her father's choosing, not when her heart was increasingly occupied with thoughts of Xavier Quinn. Yet refusing outright would only escalate tensions further. Perhaps it would be wiser to meet this James, be politely disinterested, and thereby demonstrate to her father that dictating her romantic choices was as futile as trying to control her other activities had become. That evening, James Blackburn proved to be exactly as Wilhelmina had anticipated, handsome in a conventional way, impeccably dressed, and utterly boring. Throughout dinner, he expounded at length about banking regulations, railroad investments, and his father's business acumen, barely pausing to allow Wilhelmina or Harold to contribute to the conversation. "Of course, a man in my position requires the right sort of wife," James declared over dessert, eyeing Wilhelmina appraisingly. "Someone who understands society and can manage a proper household. My mother has trained several of our maids personally, so my future wife will have excellent staff to direct." "How fortunate for her," Wilhelmina murmured, catching the warning glance from her father. "I imagine you have specific qualities you seek in a partner," James smiled condescendingly. "Naturally. Beauty is important. Of course, first impressions matter in business circles. A pleasant disposition, musical ability, and basic literacy for household accounts. Nothing too taxing. I wouldn't want my wife troubling herself with complex matters better left to men." Wilhelmina nearly choked on her tea. "Indeed, and what of her opinions and interests? Do those factor into your considerations?" James looked puzzled by the question. "Well, I suppose she should be interested in whatever I find important. That's only natural, isn't it? A wife's duty is to support her husband's endeavors. And if she has endeavors of her own," Wilhelmina pressed, ignoring her father's increasingly agitated expression. "Such as?" James asked, genuinely perplexed. "Writing for publication, perhaps? Or establishing community resources like libraries?" Wilhelmina kept her tone conversational despite her growing irritation. James laughed, actually laughed, as if she'd told an amusing joke. "My dear Miss Gardner, why would a lady with a comfortable home and a successful husband need such diversions? Once children arrive, such fanciful notions disappear anyway. My mother always says that motherhood is woman's true fulfillment." Wilhelmina set down her fork with a slight clatter. "Mr. Blackburn, have you read any of Mary Wollstonecraft's works on the education and rights of women?" James blinked in confusion. "I can't say that I have. Sounds rather dry." "Willa," Harold interjected hastily, "perhaps we should adjourn to the parlor for coffee. James, do you play chess? I have a fine set from Europe." The remainder of the evening passed in strained politeness. Wilhelmina spoke only when directly addressed, offering minimal responses that clearly baffled James, who had obviously expected to be received with greater enthusiasm. When he finally departed just after 9 o'clock, Wilhelmina felt an overwhelming relief. "Well?" Harold demanded once they were alone. "James is exactly the sort of man you should be considering, established, respectable, with excellent prospects." "Father, if you believe that man and I are remotely compatible, then you truly don't know me at all," Wilhelmina replied wearily. He views women as decorative possessions, not thinking beings. He would expect me to abandon everything that gives my life meaning and purpose." Harold's expression softened unexpectedly. "Is that what you think marriage is, Willa? Abandonment of self?" "Your mother never surrendered her identity when she married me." "No, she didn't," Wilhelmina agreed. "Because you respected her intelligence and supported her interests. You loved her for who she was, not what society said she should be." A look of pain crossed Harold's face. "Your mother was exceptional, as you've always told me I am," Wilhelmina pointed out gently. "So why would you want me to marry a man who sees me as interchangeable with any other socially acceptable female?" Harold sank into his armchair, suddenly looking every one of his 50 years. "Because men like James Blackburn are safe, Willa, predictable. They follow established paths and protect what's theirs. Men like Quinn are exceptional too," Wilhelmina finished for him. "In different ways, perhaps, but no less valuable." Her father studied her face for a long moment. "You care for him, don't you? It's not just rebellion or a passing fancy." The question deserved honesty. "Yes, father, I admire and respect Xavier Quinn, and yes, I have deeper feelings for him as well." Harold closed his eyes briefly. "I feared as much." He leaned forward, his voice earnest. "Willa, I only want what's best for you, to keep you safe and secure." "I know." Wilhelmina moved to kneel beside his chair, taking his hand as she had done countless times since childhood. "But father, safety isn't everything. Mother taught me that. She could have stayed in Boston with her parents, married a banker or lawyer there. Instead, she chose adventure with you in the West. She chose love over security." "And died far from home," Harold said bitterly. "She died loved," Wilhelmina countered, "having lived fully on her own terms." "Would you have denied her that choice?" Harold had no immediate answer. After a long silence, he squeezed her hand. "I need time, Willa. This isn't easy for me." It wasn't the blessing she might have hoped for, but it wasn't outright rejection either. Wilhelmina recognized it as the beginning of acceptance, painful and reluctant, but real nonetheless. "Thank you, father," she said softly, rising to kiss his cheek. "That's all I ask." As June bloomed across the Nevada landscape, the old schoolhouse underwent a remarkable transformation. Under the joint efforts of town volunteers and Paiute workers, the building was repaired, cleaned, and outfitted with additional shelving. Donated books began arriving daily, not just from Reno residents, but from neighboring settlements as well. Once word spread of the initiative, Wilhelmina threw herself into the project with boundless energy. She organized cataloging sessions, arranged furniture, and wrote guidelines for borrowing. Her articles in the Nevada Sentinel kept the community informed of progress and needs, resulting in a steady stream of donations ranging from books to lamps to comfortable reading chairs. Xavier was a constant presence during this time, though always maintaining a respectful distance when Harold was nearby. The rancher contributed not only his original collection of books, but also his carpentry skills, crafting a beautiful oak desk for the librarian and reading tables that won universal admiration. Joseph and his Paiute craftsmen added intricate wooden bookends and decorative elements that blended their traditional designs with practical function. The library project became a bridge between communities previously separated by prejudice and misunderstanding. Townspeople who had never spoken to Native Americans found themselves working alongside them, sharing skills and stories. Children from both groups played together during work breaks, their natural curiosity overcoming learned barriers. Throughout these weeks, Wilhelmina's relationship with her father continued to evolve. Harold, seeing his daughter's capability and growing community respect, gradually relaxed his vigilance. He began referring to Wilhelmina's library with unmistakable pride, and though he still watched her interactions with Xavier carefully, he no longer objected to them outright. One warm evening in mid-June, as Wilhelmina and Xavier worked late cataloging a particularly large donation of books, their conversation turned personal. "You never finished telling me about your sister," Wilhelmina said, marking numbers inside a volume of poetry. "What happened after she ran away?" Xavier paused in his shelving, his back to her. "Elizabeth married a man named Harlan Doyle. He seemed respectable at first, owned a small ranch in Colorado, but he had demons, drinking, gambling. When he lost, he took his anger out on Elizabeth." Wilhelmina set down her pencil. "Oh, Xavier. I didn't know how bad it was until too late." Xavier's voice was tight with old pain. "By the time I found them, she was broken, not just physically. Something inside her had died. I brought her to my ranch, tried to help her heal, but she caught fever that winter. Didn't have the strength to fight it." Wilhelmina crossed to him, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "I'm so sorry." Xavier turned to face her, his expression haunted. "Before she died, Elizabeth made me promise something. She said, 'Don't let anyone steal a woman's spirit, Xavier.' That's worse than any beating." The words hung in the quiet room, weighted with significance for them both. Wilhelmina understood suddenly why Xavier had been so determined to treat her as an equal, to defend her right to independence. "Is that why you returned my journal that day? Why you've supported the library and my writing?" Xavier nodded slowly. "I recognized something in you, Wilhelmina, a bright spirit being slowly dimmed by well-intentioned constraint. I couldn't stand by and watch it happen again." "You saved me," she whispered. "Not from danger, but from invisibility. From slowly disappearing into the person others wanted me to be rather than who I truly am." "You saved yourself," Xavier corrected gently. "I merely offered encouragement." They stood close, the air between them charged with unspoken emotion. Wilhelmina was acutely aware of Xavier's breathing, of the warmth radiating from his body, of how easy it would be to close the small distance between them. As if reading her thoughts, Xavier stepped back slightly. "Your father has been more accepting lately. I don't want to jeopardize that progress." "My father is learning to see me as an adult," Wilhelmina said softly. "Part of that is recognizing that my heart makes its own choices." Xavier's gaze intensified. "And what does your heart choose, Wilhelmina?" The question demanded complete honesty. "You," she answered simply. "It chooses you, Xavier." For a breathless moment, neither moved. Then Xavier slowly lifted his hand to cup her cheek, his touch feather light. "I've tried to be patient, to prove myself worthy of you in your father's eyes, but my feelings grow stronger each day." "As do mine," Wilhelmina admitted, leaning slightly into his touch. "I can offer you a good life," Xavier said earnestly. "Not as luxurious as your father's house, perhaps, but my ranch is profitable, the house comfortable. You'd have freedom there, Wilhelmina. Space to write, to think, to be yourself completely." Wilhelmina smiled, recognizing the declaration for what it was, not quite a proposal, but a vision of a shared future. "It sounds wonderful." Xavier's thumb traced her cheekbone with exquisite gentleness. "There's something else I've wanted to do since the moment I found your journal by the creek." "Yes." Wilhelmina's voice was barely a whisper. "This," Xavier murmured and lowered his lips to hers. The kiss was tender, questioning at first, then deepening as Wilhelmina responded. His arms encircled her waist as hers wound around his neck, drawing them closer together. The world narrowed to this moment, this connection, this silent declaration of feelings too powerful for words alone. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Wilhelmina Gardner, Not part of you or some idealized version of you. All of you, your mind, your spirit, your strength. Everything. Tears pricked at Wilhelmina's eyes. And I love you, Xavier Quinn, for seeing me when others looked past me, for respecting me when others dismissed me, for loving me as I am, not as someone you wish me to be. They might have remained lost in each other indefinitely had the library door not suddenly opened, admitting a gust of evening air and Harold Gardner. Wilhelmina and Xavier stepped apart quickly, but not quickly enough. Harold stood frozen in the doorway, his expression cycling rapidly from surprise to anger to something more complicated, a mixture of resignation and concern. "Father," Wilhelmina began, her voice steadier than she felt, "we were just finishing the cataloging." "So I see," Harold replied dryly. When no one spoke further, he sighed heavily. "Quinn, I'd like a word with you, alone." Xavier straightened his shoulders. "Of course, Mr. Gardner." "Father, whatever you have to say to Xavier, you can say in my presence," Wilhelmina insisted. Harold's gaze shifted to his daughter. "Willa, please, allow me this courtesy." Something in her father's tone, request rather than demand, made Wilhelmina relent. "Very well, I'll wait outside." As she passed her father in the doorway, he surprised her by briefly touching her arm, a small gesture of reassurance. It gave her hope that perhaps this confrontation might not end as disastrously as she feared. On the schoolhouse porch, Wilhelmina paced nervously, straining to hear the men's voices without success. The minutes stretched endlessly. Just when she had decided to go back inside regardless of her promise, the door opened and Xavier emerged, followed by her father. Xavier's expression was unreadable, but Harold looked oddly at peace. "Willa, it's getting late. We should head home." "Father, what did you—" "Not now," Harold interrupted gently. "Quinn and I have reached an understanding. We can discuss it tomorrow." Xavier stepped forward. "Wilhelmina, trust your father in this, please." The use of her full name in front of Harold, a small but significant acknowledgement of her adulthood, convinced her more than his words. "All right. Good night, Mr. Quinn. Miss Gardner." Xavier tipped his hat, his eyes conveying what he couldn't say aloud. "Mr. Gardner." As he mounted his horse and rode into the gathering dusk, Wilhelmina turned to her father. "What kind of understanding have you reached?" Harold offered his arm. "Patience, Willa. Some things are worth waiting for." The walk home passed in curious silence, her father seemingly lost in thought. When they reached their house, Harold paused on the porch, gazing up at the stars. "Your mother loved evenings like this," he said unexpectedly. "Said the stars were brighter in Nevada than anywhere else on Earth." Wilhelmina stood quietly beside him, sensing he had more to say. "She was right about so many things," Harold continued, "including what she said about you just before she died." "What did she say?" Wilhelmina asked softly. Harold's eyes remained on the stars. "She made me promise to let you fly when you were ready. Said you had her spirit and my determination, a combination that would need freedom to truly thrive." He turned to face his daughter. "I failed her in that, Willa. Failed you too." "Father, no, let me finish." Harold's voice was thick with emotion. "I was so afraid of losing you that I nearly drove you away. Tonight, seeing you with Quinn, I finally understood what your mother meant. You're not just ready to fly, Willa. You've been soaring for some time now, despite my attempts to clip your wings." Tears filled Wilhelmina's eyes. "I never wanted to leave you, Father, only to be seen for who I am." "Quinn sees you," Harold acknowledged. "That much is clear, and if I'm honest, he's a better man than my prejudice allowed me to recognize. His feelings for you are genuine, as are yours for him." "They are," Wilhelmina confirmed. "I love him, Father." Harold nodded slowly. "I know. That's why I've given him permission to court you properly, with the understanding that your happiness and independence will always be respected." Wilhelmina threw her arms around her father, overcome with joy and gratitude. "Thank you, father." "Thank you." Harold held her close as he had when she was small. "Don't thank me, Willa. I should have trusted you long ago. Can you forgive an old man's fear and foolishness?" "There's nothing to forgive," Wilhelmina assured him. "We both needed time to find our way after losing Mother." As they entered the house together, Wilhelmina felt as though a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. For the first time since her mother's death, she and her father were truly seeing each other not as protector and protected, but as two adults sharing love and respect. That night, Wilhelmina wrote in her journal by lamplight, pouring out her joy and hopes for the future. Whatever tomorrow might bring, she faced it not as the child her father had tried to preserve, but as the woman Xavier Quinn had recognized from the beginning, strong, capable, and ready to embrace all the possibilities that life might offer. The Reno Public Library opened its doors on a bright July morning with a celebration that brought together the entire community. Children from town and the Paiute settlement explored the shelves with equal delight, while adults admired the craftsmanship and growing collection of nearly 500 volumes. Mayor Whitley gave a speech praising the extraordinary cooperation between diverse citizens that had made the project possible. In the center of it all stood Wilhelmina Gardner, radiant in a new blue dress, accepting congratulations and answering questions about the library's operation. Her father watched from nearby, his pride evident in every introduction he made. "My daughter, Wilhelmina, the founder of our new library." Xavier moved easily through the crowd, his quiet confidence and respectful manner winning over even those who had initially viewed him with suspicion. The formal courtship that Harold had permitted was progressing with a proper blend of tradition and the independence that both Xavier and Wilhelmina valued. 3 times weekly, Xavier called at the Gardner home to escort Wilhelmina on rides through the countryside, picnics by the creek, or community events. Harold no longer insisted on chaperoning these outings, though they remained properly public. The town had quickly adjusted to seeing them together, and most approved of the match, despite their different backgrounds. As the library celebration wound down late that afternoon, Xavier approached Wilhelmina with a small package wrapped in brown paper. "A gift for the librarian," he said with a smile, "though perhaps not for public display." Intrigued, Wilhelmina unwrapped it to discover a leather-bound journal even finer than the one he had returned to her months ago. Inside the cover was an inscription: "For your private thoughts and public drafts, may they continue to change our world, with all my love, XQ." "It's beautiful," she whispered, deeply touched. "There's something else," Xavier said, his voice low. "I'd like to show you my ranch tomorrow, the house, the land. I want you to see what life there might be like." The implication was clear. After 2 months of courtship, Xavier was ready to formalize their relationship. Wilhelmina's heart quickened. "I'd like that very much." "I'll ask Father this evening." Harold readily agreed when she made the request at dinner. "Quinn's ranch is quite impressive from what I hear. Nearly 2,000 acres now, with the new parcel he acquired last month. You've been inquiring about Xavier's business affairs?" Wilhelmina asked, surprised. Harold looked slightly embarrassed. "A father doesn't relinquish all protective instincts overnight, Willa, but I'm pleased to say Quinn's operation is sound. Diversified, 2 cattle, horses, even some experimental crops. Forward-thinking." Wilhelmina hid a smile at her father's transparent investigations. "Yes, Xavier mentioned his agricultural experiments. He's corresponding with farmers in California about drought-resistant varieties." Sensible." Harold studied his plate. "I suppose you'll be wanting to set a date soon." Wilhelmina nearly choked on her water. "Father, he hasn't even proposed." "Hasn't he? Then what's this ranch visit about?" Harold raised an eyebrow. "I wasn't born yesterday, Willa." "He wants me to see the place before making any decisions," Wilhelmina explained, her cheeks warm. "It's consideration, not presumption." Harold nodded approvingly. "As I said, the man has sense." After a moment, he added more softly, "Your mother would like him, I think. She always valued honesty and courage above social standing. And what about you, father? Have you come to like Xavier at all?" Harold considered the question seriously. "I respect him. The liking is growing." His expression softened into a rare smile. "He makes you happy. That counts for a great deal." The next day dawned clear and mild. Xavier arrived at the Gardner home promptly at 10, driving a smart buggy pulled by 2 matching bay horses. Harold came out to greet him, inspecting the rig with expert eyes. "Fine animals, Quinn," he acknowledged. "Morgan bloodlines." "Yes, sir. Bred them myself from stock I brought from Kentucky." Xavier helped Wilhelmina into the buggy with careful hands. "We should return by sundown, but if there's any delay, I'll send a rider to inform you." Harold nodded, his expression a mixture of lingering protectiveness and newfound trust. "See that you do. Enjoy your day, Willa." As they drove out of town, Wilhelmina felt a curious blend of excitement and serenity. The countryside opened before them, rolling hills golden with summer grasses, scattered with sagebrush and occasional stands of cottonwood marking watercourses. "It's about 5 miles to the main house," Xavier explained as they followed a well-maintained road eastward. "The ranch extends from that ridge to the north all the way to the creek that marks the southern boundary." "It's beautiful country," Wilhelmina observed, admiring the vast landscape. "Do you ever feel isolated out here?" Xavier considered the question. "Sometimes, especially in winter when travel is difficult, but there's a difference between isolation and solitude. The latter can be quite companionable with the right person." His meaning was clear, and Wilhelmina smiled. "I've always loved open spaces. Even as a child, I preferred the garden to the parlor." "There's plenty of open space at Quinn Ranch," Xavier said, "though the house itself is quite comfortable. I've been making improvements this past year." They crested a small rise, and the ranch headquarters came into view in the valley below. Wilhelmina's first impression was of thoughtful planning buildings arranged for efficiency but also for beauty, with trees providing shade and windbreaks. The main house was larger than she had expected, a 2-story structure of sturdy timber with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. As they approached, several ranch hands tipped their hats respectfully. A Paiute woman emerged from what appeared to be the cookhouse, wiping her hands on an apron. "That's Martha," Xavier explained, "Joseph's cousin. She manages the household and cooking for the ranch hands, speaks better English than most of the townspeople." "You employ Paiute workers regularly?" Wilhelmina asked. "About half my crew is Paiute, half white." Xavier guided the buggy toward the main house. "They bring different skills, different perspectives, makes for stronger operations all around." He helped Wilhelmina down, leading her toward the house with evident pride. "I built the original cabin myself, but I've expanded over the years." The east wing was just completed this spring. The interior surprised Wilhelmina with its refined comfort. Though masculine in character, the rooms were well proportioned and thoughtfully furnished with a blend of practical pieces and unexpected luxuries. A fine piano in the parlor, shelves of books in the study, colorful Paiute baskets and weavings adding warmth to whitewashed walls. "Xavier, this is lovely," Wilhelmina said sincerely. "I had no idea your home was so established." Xavier smiled. Most people assume I live like a hermit in a one-room cabin. I enjoy proving them wrong." He hesitated. "There's something specific I want to show you upstairs, if you're comfortable with that." In town, entering a bachelor's bedroom would be scandalously improper, but they were miles from town, and Wilhelmina trusted Xavier implicitly. "Yes, I'd like to see it." He led her up the wide staircase to the second floor, past several closed doors to one at the end of the hall. "This room faces east. Best light in the house." When he opened the door, Wilhelmina gasped softly. The large, sunny room had been converted into a writing study. A beautiful desk stood before windows overlooking the valley. Bookshelves lined one wall, and a comfortable reading chair was positioned near a small fireplace. "I thought you might want a space of your own," Xavier said quietly, "for your writing and library work. The connecting door leads to what would be our bedroom, but this would be your private domain, our bedroom." The words sent a flutter through Wilhelmina's chest. She moved to the desk, running her fingers over its smooth surface. "You created this for me, for the woman I hope will be my wife." Xavier's voice was solemn now. "Wilhelmina, I've tried to show you what life with me might be like. Not perfect, certainly not as refined as you're accustomed to, but a life where you would always be respected, always be heard, always be loved for exactly who you are." He crossed to stand before her, taking both her hands in his. "I love you. I think I began loving you the moment I read your poetry about eagles soaring free. Will you marry me, Wilhelmina? Will you make this house a home, fill it with your words and thoughts and spirit?" Tears blurred Wilhelmina's vision. "Yes, Xavier. Yes, I will marry you. I love you so much." Xavier pulled her gently into his arms, his kiss conveying all the joy and promise of their future together. When they finally parted, he reached into his pocket and produced a ring, a delicate gold band set with a single pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds. "It was my mother's," he explained as he slipped it onto her finger. "She made me promise to give it only to a woman of true strength and character." "I'll wear it with pride," Wilhelmina whispered, admiring its simple elegance. "And love." They spent the remainder of the day exploring the ranch, the stables with their fine horses, the innovative irrigation system Xavier had designed, the experimental garden where he was testing drought-resistant crops. Everywhere they went, workers greeted them with respect and obvious affection for their employer. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, they reluctantly turned the buggy back toward town. The return journey was filled with plans and dreams: a September wedding, winter improvements to the house, spring planting in the garden Wilhelmina would design. "What about your father?" Xavier asked as they approached Reno. "Do you think he'll approve?" "I believe he expects it," Wilhelmina replied with a smile. "And yes, I think he will approve. He's come to respect you greatly, though he tries not to show it." Harold was waiting on the porch when they arrived, watching their approach with poorly disguised anticipation. One look at their radiant faces told him everything he needed to know. "I see congratulations are in order," he said as Xavier helped Wilhelmina down from the buggy. "Yes, sir," Xavier confirmed. "With your blessing, Wilhelmina has agreed to become my wife." Harold studied the couple before him, his daughter standing tall and confident, her hand linked with Xavier's in a gesture of equal partnership. "You have my blessing," he said finally, "and my sincere wish for your happiness." He extended his hand to Xavier, who shook it firmly. Then, in a move that surprised both men, Harold pulled his future son-in-law into a brief but heartfelt embrace. "Take care of each other," he said gruffly. "That's what matters most." The wedding took place on a perfect September day, with the aspen trees beginning to turn gold against the mountains. The entire town of Reno seemed to attend, along with a significant contingent from the Paiute settlement. The ceremony blended traditions: a Christian service performed by Reverend Billings, followed by a Paiute blessing offered by Joseph's grandfather. Wilhelmina wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully altered by Mrs. Billings and Martha to reflect both tradition and Wilhelmina's more modern sensibilities. Xavier stood tall and proud in a new suit, his eyes never leaving his bride as they exchanged their vows. Harold gave his daughter away with dignity and genuine joy, his journey from overprotective father to supportive parent complete at last. As he placed Wilhelmina's hand in Xavier's, he whispered, "She was always meant to soar. Thank you for seeing that from the beginning." The celebration afterward was unlike anything Reno had seen before: townspeople and Paiute dancing together, sharing food and stories, barriers of prejudice temporarily forgotten in the joy of the occasion. Even Bartholomew Stryker, who had initially opposed Xavier's water rights proposal, was seen deep in conversation with Joseph Winnemucca about cattle breeding techniques. As evening approached, Wilhelmina and Xavier prepared to depart for their new life together. Harold pulled his daughter aside for a private moment. "Your mother would be so proud of you, Willa," he said, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "Of the woman you've become, the path you've chosen." "I wish she could be here," Wilhelmina replied, straightening her father's tie with affectionate hands. "She is, in a way." Harold touched her cheek gently. In every strong, independent choice you make." "Will you be all right, father, alone in the house?" Harold smiled. "I won't be alone for long. I've decided to accept that teaching position at the university in San Francisco. It's time for me to start a new chapter too." "Really?" Wilhelmina was delighted. Her father had received the offer months ago but had been reluctant to leave Reno and her. "Really?" "I'll visit often, of course. Have to make sure Quinn is treating you properly." The twinkle in Harold's eye belied his stern tone. "And someday perhaps meet my grandchildren." "Someday," Wilhelmina agreed, embracing him tightly. "I love you, father, and I love you, my darling girl." "Always have, always will." As the newlyweds rode away in Xavier's buggy, now decorated with flowers and ribbons by well-wishers, Wilhelmina looked back at the town where she had grown from child to woman, at her father standing tall and proud, at the friends and community that had been part of her journey. "Are you ready for our new adventure?" Xavier asked, his hand warm over hers. Wilhelmina turned to face forward toward their future together. "I've been ready my whole life. I just needed someone who could see me clearly enough to journey beside me rather than try to lead me." "Always beside you," Xavier promised. "Never ahead, never behind, partners in everything." As they drove toward the setting sun, Wilhelmina reflected on the strange, wonderful path that had brought them together. Her father's overprotection, meant to keep her safe, had instead nearly smothered her spirit. Xavier's respect, offered when no one else saw her true worth, had helped her reclaim her voice and her strength. Love, she realized, wasn't about possession or protection or control. True love was about recognition, seeing the other person completely and valuing them for exactly who they were. Xavier had given her that gift from the beginning, and she had returned it in full measure. The road ahead stretched out before them, leading to their ranch, their home, their shared future. Wilhelmina Gardner Quinn had finally spread her wings, and with Xavier beside her, she would soar higher than she had ever imagined possible. 5 years later, the Quinn Ranch had flourished beyond anyone's expectations. The innovative farming methods Xavier had introduced proved highly successful, and the library Wilhelmina had established in Reno had expanded to include a small school that welcomed children from both the town and the Paiute settlement. On a warm spring morning, Wilhelmina sat on the wide porch of their home, watching Xavier teaching their 3-year-old son, Harold, to ride his first pony. Their 1-year-old daughter, Elizabeth, played contentedly at Wilhelmina's feet while she worked on final revisions to her first novel, a story of frontier life that had already attracted interest from a publisher in San Francisco. The sound of an approaching carriage drew her attention. She smiled broadly as she recognized her father, now a distinguished professor who visited regularly from the city. Harold Gardner had aged well, his initially reluctant move to San Francisco having reinvigorated him professionally and socially. "Grandfather's here." Wilhelmina called to Xavier and little Harold. The boy immediately urged his pony toward the house, Xavier walking alongside to ensure his safety. By the time the carriage reached the yard, the entire family had gathered to welcome their visitor. "There's my namesake," Harold Sr. exclaimed, lifting the boy high. "Growing like a weed and riding already, and little Elizabeth more beautiful each time I see her." Xavier helped his father-in-law with his bags. "Good journey, Harold." "Excellent. The new rail connection makes it much easier." Harold embraced his son-in-law warmly. "The ranch looks prosperous, Quinn. Those new irrigation channels seem to be working." "They are. Crop yield is up 30% this year." Xavier's pride was evident. Wilhelmina's idea to rotate plantings has made a significant difference too. Harold turned to his daughter, embracing her with special tenderness. "And how is my favorite author? I've been telling all my colleagues about your forthcoming book." "Final revisions nearly complete," Wilhelmina reported happily. "Mr. Thatcher from the Sentinel has agreed to print excerpts next month." As they moved inside for refreshments, Wilhelmina marveled at how naturally her father and husband conversed, discussing everything from agricultural policy to literature with mutual respect. The antagonism of those early days had evolved into genuine affection and appreciation. That evening, after the children were asleep, the adults sat on the porch watching fireflies rise from the meadow grass. Harold raised his glass in a toast. "To family," he said simply. "And to growth of crops, of children, and of understanding." "To family," Xavier and Wilhelmina echoed, their glasses touching. As darkness settled over the land, Wilhelmina leaned against her husband's shoulder, content in a way she had once thought impossible. The girl who had been treated like a child though she was grown had become a woman, fully realized wife, mother, writer, community leader. And the cowboy who had respected her from the beginning continued to be her strongest advocate and most devoted partner. "Happy," Xavier murmured, his arm tightening around her. Wilhelmina looked up at the stars, the same stars her mother had loved, now watching over all of them. "Completely," she answered, and knew it was absolutely true.